I just want the jobs, but that's never the best jobs. Like, I can't stand those. I like boxes, but I feel like I really like boxes. So, that's the problem.
So, registration is coming. I don't know the exact date, but I think next week we got to start doing registration for next year. And I guess the counselors have made a YouTube video with incredible production. We're talking registration. So registration is next week, or I think next week. You guys watch a video, I'll tell you a little bit, a few things, but most of it's going to be on your own. I don't think it's that complex. I think you can handle it. As soon as I find out anything, I'll let you know. Still a little vague. I guess it's always in February, but this year it just seems really early because of just the nature of the year. Next, I think on Monday I'm going to have a quiz, and the quiz is going to be on what we talked about in class. I was looking at it and realized the unit is going to be way too big if I wait to where I was going to have a unit test. It would be massive. And I guess I can still do that. It'd be a lot harder, but I think you guys want to challenge yourselves, right? No, I just thought it'd be too unwieldy. So I'm going to do some Reconstruction, the West, and the business growth on that quiz. So it'll be like 50 multiple choice and a couple short IDs. Speaking of short IDs, I just put in the assignment from your review book. So that red, white, and blue book that you should have checked out a long time ago. It's a great source. I hope you have used this to look at various notes. It really is a good reference. That's part of the reason I give you, but also as practice test questions. And if you go on my webpage to the AP test review, the key is there. So you can look at the key. So just US history, AP test review, that's the key. But I'm assigning something out of this book. It dropped on Teams this morning, and it's on page 337, I believe, of the review book. So I am right here, but it just happens to be a PDF up there. Pretty exciting, huh? A PDF. By the way, this class is getting smaller, even though the number, we have a lot more people DOI, but it's just not 12. I understand why, and if we go back full time, it might even be more. Who knows? It just hit me all of a sudden. Okay, so we've been doing short IDs, and the reason why I do that is good prep for essays, but also the College Board for the AP exam does something called a short answer question. And what a short answer question is, each question are actually three short IDs. That's what a short answer question is. And so I'm assigning that to you. On page 337, there are three, question 1, question 2, and question 3. It appears as though I am not showing my screen. Is that what it is? Okay, so I think I was thinking about it then. All right, so there are three questions on here. So 1, 2, and 3. Exciting, huh? You have to pick one of those three to do. And so what it is question 1 has 3 parts. And so each part is a short ID. These are going to be smaller ones. It's only 3 sentences. No topic sentence, just 3 sentences. So basically, explain what it is. I didn't like that. Explain what it is, give an example, and then shows what it leads to, the effect it has, why it's important, so it led to something. So just, we've been doing about 4 sentence short ideas, so 3 sentences. Explain what it is, so what, when, where, why, as much as that you can get in. Give an example of it, and why it's important, the effect of it, what it led to. And so you do 1 for A, 1 for B, 1 for B, 1 for C. So that's a total of 9 sentences. Math is fun, isn't it? There's no topic sentence, no conclusion sentence, just that format I gave you. Now, this has a couple big advantages. So the thing I like about short answer questions, it's a short ID, but they'll give you something to kind of point you to a direction. And the way that makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? You're not just writing what you know, you're not trying to look, I know what Mr. Partners wants this. No, it's kind of focusing on this. We're talking about how government helped railroads. But you have to come up with what your ID is. You have to come up with that one specific example. Like land grants for the Pacific Railroad Act, or the U.S. Army protecting the railroad workers. Things like that. You have to come up with it. In a way that's easier, though, because you get to write what you know. So that's what you have to do. You have to pick one of these to do on Wednesday morning, so before class, Wednesday morning, and so you have to do 3 3-sentence short IDs. Any questions on that? You choose 1, 2, or 3. You come up with it. The directive, they might come up with a little quote and have you come up with an example related to the quote. I like these in a way. Do the short ID format. It can be varied enough that essays can be really narrow, so you get a broad swath of information. Since we're doing short IDs, these should be a little bit easier, though, because we're directed to something more directed. And and the other thing is okay, last year I told you the AP exam, because of COVID, they only did 1 DBQ, which we'll do another one here in a couple weeks. They only did 1 DBQ, and that was pretty difficult. You had no choices. But I guess human geography and some other things just did short answer questions. And I'm really hoping if they have to make it shorter, it would just be short answer questions. Because then you have a choice. I think that would be a lot better for you. And so cross your fingers. I hope so. Of course, they did love DBQ, so we'll see. And you also notice, if you have 3 like this on some basic topic, that's almost an essay. So it is a building block of a regular essay. Just add a couple more things, topics, and there you go. Are we good? Wednesday, 3:37. I included this PDF just to make sure you have it, but you have it in your book, and the book has great information on here. The book is not in depth, but it has the basic stuff. Oh, and one more thing. I also included just 3 multiple choice questions in the format they asked for the AP exam. And I want you to do those. I gave you the key in the assignment. I just want you to look at them. All right, so let's go and take your notes out there. Everyone got that? Each short answer question has 3 3-sentence short IDs. No topic sentence, no conclusion. Yeah. Just do the 3 multiple choice. Okay. And all they do is they give you some kind of stimulus to help trigger a memory, and then ask 3 multiple choice. It's a paragraph. Sometimes it's a political cartoon. Sometimes it's a graph. You're not like, the multiple choices aren't what's in the paragraph. But the multiple choices are stimulating something, some event, some time period, and this is Industrial Rev. All right, so we got the railroads. I went through all the different things that involved in railroads and railroad development. And so let me make sure this is on, it's recording. Oh, beautiful. I can't do it. I gotta do it here. Do this. I need a producer. Extra credit for anybody who makes this, jumps off the. No. Jumps off your desk. See? All right. So the thing about railroads, anytime there's production of railroad, it stimulates everything. If there's aid for railroads, it's aid to the steel industry. And so government aid for business can actually go to all different forms of business. And this is huge, massive amounts of aid. And there's good and bad elements of that. We'll get to some of those. But they actually call it the multiplier effect, because it actually contributes significantly more to the economy than what they put into it. But the government aid for railroads would be massive. Direct and indirect acts. We've talked about the Pacific Railroad Act. And that was land grants and no interest loans. And then they doubled that. Huge, huge benefits. But also indirect aid, like providing the Army to make sure American Indians don't attack it. Or if you give money to a railroad like the Union Pacific, if the federal government does, that's telling potential investors the federal government has a vested interest in this railroad. Therefore, we're not going to let it collapse. Don't you want to invest in a company that the federal government has said we're not going to let collapse? That has happened to you a couple different times in your lifetime, not you directly, but indirectly. The U.S. government has given, in fact, the Federal Reserve gave trillions of dollars of loan guarantees to banks. They did it again in April. That's telling the very biggest banks, hey, we're not going to let you collapse. If you have money, good thing to put money in because the government's not going to let it collapse. We can again argue that's good or bad thing. But also, as we said before, that promoted other industries. Railroads, timber industry. But also towns, buildings, railroads, and this is a massive promotion. Yes, at the expense of those who live there. There are a lot of effects to this, but oh, don't forget, this is a checkerboard pattern of land grants. So it wasn't all this land. I showed you that graph where it's every other section, but it's still immense. The school was built on land given to the Northern Pacific Railroad. And then they sold it and sold it and sold it, etc. And by the way, you notice nothing in Texas. There's no federal government, very little federal government land in Texas. Remember, that was an independent country. Montana was a state, a territory, so we have lots of federal land. Okay, but here's the other thing. The government, they can step in and pick winners. Which companies will build the railroad? Just like I told you before, if you give government aid, wow, that's a big subsidy to invest in that. Other railroads didn't get it, but the Union Pacific is guaranteed to be big. Heck, even with mismanagement, they know they'll be protected. Same thing with the Northern Pacific, which was the definition of mismanagement. Now it's part of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe system. We have nothing but monopolies now. So, railroads, huge. And you combine that with, this is government policy. This is policy. This is politics. Oh, I just thought this is a steam engine. It's an American, it's called. And that is a roundhouse where you repair trains. And if you ever get a chance to see a roundhouse, they're absolutely amazing. Just technological feats. You pull the train in, the actual floor can rotate and move the train and come out a different track. It's really cool. But we're coming to a concept called producer demand. This is part of railroads too. But producer demand is basically this. The railroads want everything produced. And so the vast majority of demand for manufactured goods were other industries. The railroad industry bought most of the steel and most of the wood. It's not like that to now. Let's say to now, because that's my combination of today and now. To now. It's not based on consumers yet, the economy. In the 19th century, it's based upon industry buying the goods of industry. And I put this graph up there to show you the number of miles built of track. And look at all of that production. Now, I think you probably guess what's going to happen. Eventually, they'll produce more than what is needed, which they did, and a lot of tracks have gone under. There are a lot of railroads, but companies still want to produce goods. That's why they need people to buy. It's just starting, but you'll see it 1920s through today. And so with that, look at railroads. With massive government aid and whole new business practices I'll get to, 1870, there's the first transcontinental. All the railroads here, 1890, it's pretty stunning. How much more additional track? And there's Great Northern, Northern Pacific, there'd soon be the Milwaukee go across here, Union Pacific, the Burlington's gonna come up here, and that leads us to number 9. The marriage between business and government, where business has become more and more dominant. And business leaders, I know I put leader, I just meant to put leaders, are going to contribute to politicians. And they want the rules to be rigged in their favor. Politicians do not get money from people unless people want something. And those with a lot of money want a lot. The old story was you dance with who brung you. And what do they want? The first thing they want, laissez-faire economics. Now, we've talked about this, or laissez-faire, you say, correct. Hands off by government, hands off. But it wasn't quite hands off. It was hands off for competition. They can compete any way they want. They can produce any goods, treat their workers, or drive out competitors any way they want. But they wanted massive amounts of government aid. And we saw this with railroads because it was just the most direct. Here's money and land, do what you want. Make money any way you want. And once again, you have to make your own value judgment on that. But it's a huge amount of aid. But here's the big thing about laissez-faire economics. By definition, this is going to help big. This helps the big. Why? The iron rule of economics. The one I've mentioned before, and I can't emphasize enough. Economies of scale. The bigger a company is, they can come up with production methods because they can afford it, that are more efficient, they can cut their costs and undercut their competitors. If there's no regulation of size, or do anything about size of businesses, you're basically saying, we don't want small business, we want big business, and only big business. We want something that we'll talk more about, called a monopoly. Which therefore then you don't have a market anymore. And so, this is a big effect for big business. Help us do things we want, but then don't mess with us as we drive competitors out of business. By the way, this is John D. Rockefeller. There's a lot of cartoons of Rockefeller, the head of Standard Oil. And you notice this is the White House. There's money. He's basically manipulating and altering this White House. And I like the Capitol. That's not just a factory. So this is showing the marriage, the control of big money over politics. Don't forget that. They get money, they want something. They're not sitting there thinking, boy, we love the process of government. No. I mean, in this state right now, we're having a lot of big landholders in Montana from out of state. They're trying to push down property taxes. Why? They don't want to pay property taxes, but they want to come in and take land in Montana. So, next. So I'm just telling you, it happens right now, right at this moment. In fact, we're debating it today. And by the way, we have a couple more students who have done internship, or not internships, been a page. And you missed the exciting part in the last week when they have you do all the bills. They all come in at once. Yeah. They did all the bills that really affect us, they do it like in the last 3 minutes. They just, oh, we got to do these. Okay, so tariffs. These people who wanted tariffs were called protectionists. Remember, that's a tax on imports. A tax on imports raises the price of imports. So that protects American industry. But it does so much more than that. This is a direct subsidy to business. How does it do that? We drive out competition. If there's no competition, we get rid of much of the market. If there's no competition, what does that do to prices? Raises prices. So they can charge more. And so prices go up, profits go up. It artificially alters the market. Now, there's never been really a free market, but this really shows that they talk about laissez-faire for a free market. No, I don't really want a free market. Nobody really wants a free market because there's a lot of risk involved. It's just how you have enough of market forces to give you competition. That's the big thing. Next, the gold standard. 1873, the United States would formally go on the gold standard. I can't go into the very complex and Byzantine, which means really complex. That's very redundant. But your currency has to be backed by an amount of gold. And since there's a finite amount of gold, that can mean it limits the amount of money in circulation, and therefore you have deflation. Remember, inflation is where prices go up. Deflation, prices are stagnant or go down. The value of a dollar goes up. And who does that help? You have money. Deflation really helps you. In fact, you could just have your money and put it in a jar and put it in the backyard and bury it. If there's deflation, you dig it out and you make money because the money has gone up in value. If you don't have money, you want inflation. That increases wages, but also makes it easier to pay back debts. We have no inflation. We're on the edge of deflation if we're not deflation right now. But this helps the wealthy. No, we're not on the gold standard. Thankfully, even though some people still want to go back on the gold standard. And they're very anti-union. So this is a time of the most violent union activity in American history as workers are desperate for higher wages and better working conditions. And the US government and police, in fact, a lot of the police was specifically designed to stop unions, but they would use troops to force workers to go back to work. And the thing about it is, if there's no union, wages go down. Unions raise wages. There's a reason companies don't like unions. They also demand rules. You have all the workers say, hey, we want safer working conditions, or we all walk at the same time. They generally get them. This is something that's happening right now in Chicago. Chicago teachers are very reluctant to go back to work because they don't want to die of disease. But, and so they're supposed to go back today, and they said, no, we're not going to go. And the Chicago Teachers Union is pretty powerful, so it is right now a standoff. And we might come to that too. Who knows? This is actually, what exciting times. You get everything. Life was so boring when I was your age. All we had were rocks. Okay, with that, the point about it is there was massive government aid. Massive government aid. And they want business participants to get things like the no-interest loans for railroads or tariffs. There's reasons they do that. Now, it's obviously for, they want to make more money. They want the wealth. But at the same time, you can make the argument this is for the best economic policy. We'll come back to that. Oh, let's write one more thing. Immigration. So this is the wave of unrestricted immigration, except in what I mentioned before. Remember the Chinese Exclusion Act. And Ellis Island in New York, right on the site of soon the Statue of Liberty will come in. I'll tell you a little bit about that. I have a good story about that. As a wave of immigrants, partially to escape the industrialization of Europe and other things too. But in the short run, you increase the number of workers who are desperate for jobs and wages can drop. In the long run, actually wages can go up, but it increases the size of the market. I forgot to hit the little arrow. I was trying to play with little keys. But with that, so these are the rules. These are just some of the basic ones. Obviously, it's more complex, and yes, it happens right now. All you have to do is look at the tax code, and you know why government or business gives so much money to politicians. It's crazy. So with that, the best example of the way business looked at government, they looked at government as a way to make money, and vice versa. People got into government to make money. It's called the Credit Mobilier scandal, the biggest scandal of the Grant administration, and it epitomizes the attitude of this connection. The Credit Mobilier, this is a company, this is the Union Pacific going across. In fact, this is pretty near Promontory Point, Utah. But the Union Pacific, their owners created a company called the Credit Mobilier to build a railroad. That's the CM. They created the Credit Mobilier company to build a railroad. So the owners of the Union Pacific now own a company called the Credit Mobilier. So the Union Pacific Railroad pays the Credit Mobilier company to actually construct the tracks. Do you get this? They're paying themselves. Now you do that for a couple reasons. If you pay yourself, those people running it can collect the fees and twice. It's a way to gouge. But then what they did is the Credit Mobilier company went to the Union Pacific, remember it's the same people, and said, wow, it's going to cost 10 times more to build the railroad. Do you catch what's happening here? Yeah. And so they overcharge and then turn around and ask the government for more land and money, which they doubled. You catch what's happening here? So they got more money, and then they pay themselves big salaries that have nothing to do with the company. And what a way to gouge money. This is by definition fraud. This is fraud by any case. How did we get Congress to vote for fraud? It's called a kickback. The Credit Mobilier gave a kickback. They gave stocks to members of Congress and Grant's cabinet to support this. And then when government money went to the Union Pacific Railroad, who then went to the Credit Mobilier Railroad, they got money. When this was exposed near the end of the Grant administration, it was one of the biggest corruption scandals in history. Just blatant graft, which is stealing from the government. It's kind of shocking. It's actually a shocking affair. Stealing from the American people. Now, of course, nobody went to jail for this, but a lot of people, their political career would be tainted if they're tied to the Credit Mobilier. One of the reasons Grant, who did not personally profit, he didn't know this was going on, but he was still the president. He's accountable. That's part of the reason he didn't run for a third term. He wanted to run for a third term. But this shows the way they looked at it. And this is where we get to one of the most famous cartoons of this era. It's called The Bosses of the Senate, but where the bosses of the Senate, but the bosses of Congress. And the whole point about it was this, that big business ran government. Big business by 1890s. Now, a term for monopoly was trust. It goes back to the era. So here's the steel trust, copper trust, oil trust, iron trust, sugar trust, etc. Here are, they show me these bloated big businessmen, and they're the ones dictating terms for the Senate, which they dubbed the Millionaires Club. And if you go to Congress today, I mean, it's true, those who argue for the various industries now, almost always it's tech or banking, those seem to be the two biggies. By the way, what do you call somebody who, it's hard for me not to say the words, I'm so used to it, but speaks on behalf of the big companies? What do you call them? Yeah. You may know where the term lobbyist comes from. Yeah. You know? So Ulysses S. Grant liked being president, but didn't like all the day-to-day activity. Part of the reason there's so much corruption. So to escape this, he would just take a walk, which is so weird to think about the president just all of a sudden taking a walk down the street, a stroll to the Willard Hotel, which was the most popular hotel in DC. There are very few hotels. And he would sit in the lobby and drink and smoke cigars. The guy smoked about 3 cigars a minute, or 3 cigars an hour, and yes, died of throat cancer. But he would be there trying to be alone, and all these people from various interests would come and bug him in the lobby of the Willard Hotel. And he would just complain, I can't escape these people. And he started to call them the lobbyists, because they'd always be in the lobby waiting for him. And that's how the term, which makes no sense, that's how it came about during this era. So back to what I was going to say. So the lobbyists of the big banks, they walk right in and see virtually any member of Congress they want to see. And that's kind of like this. I mean, they can just walk right in. State, too. And trust me, you can't. Doesn't mean they're going to be totally opposite, but it's much harder for us, probably. Is anyone a lobbyist for the company yet? No, really. So, with that, number 10. As companies grew, as they became bigger and bigger, efficiency became more important. Remember economies of scale. And so everybody wanted to cut costs. If you can cut costs and increase productivity, you make more money. What is productivity? The amount that a worker can produce in a day. So basically, if you have 100 workers, you want them to produce more per day. Because if they produce more, that's more profitable. Remember, in capitalism, those who have the capital have the profit. So, cut costs. Standardization was a biggie. Anything from time zones. Rail gauge is the distance between the rails, and they standardize them, so they only have to make one type of rail car. Think how much efficient that would be. Sizes, like for clothing or anything else, they started standardizing that. Instead of making individual, you can make just one size and just crank them out. Shoe sizes, etc. Things we kind of take for granted, don't even think about. Huge changes. Think about packaging and a number of things. Just measurements. Standardizing what an inch is and what a pound is. Things, once again, we take for granted. Incredibly important. Standardization means you don't have to produce as many separate products. That's why interchangeable parts was such a big deal. You combine that with the division of labor, so you get workers working individual jobs. They get better and better at it and become more efficient. You don't want ever somebody to do something over or do 20 different jobs. You want them doing one thing. And that's where Frederick Taylor, a guy we need to know, Frederick Taylor, he worked on this for 25 years before he wrote on scientific management, the principles of scientific management. And in this book, laid out what he'd already been teaching companies and other companies were just doing, would become the Bible to become more efficient. How to train workers to take less time at breaks, to work faster. In fact, they would use the new motion pictures and they would film workers. And they would watch every motion. And they tried to get them to all have the same motion together, like a robot. In fact, that's where the term comes from. In this context, to all work together, operating the machine so they become more efficient. And things to make workers more efficient. We're coming to things like the assembly line. I'll get to in just a second. Having somebody work really, really fast, that forces everyone else to work fast. Do things to convince people to take shorter breaks, get out of the bathroom faster. They would do things like blast loud sounds in the bathroom so they get out faster. Work, work, work. Don't have to pay them more, but get more work out of them. He had great influence. And one more thing about this. Oh, by the way, makes jobs much more difficult, mind-numbingly boring. If you're nothing more than a robot, your life, the meaning of your life begins to decline. And this is also going to be the age of shoddy. This is supposed to be cost. For some reason, though, the T got cut off. So I don't know. Quality is a cost. Quality is a cost. To make goods, to make products of good quality, or even services high quality, costs money. You cut back that way, and you make more money. Now, I know if you cut back and put out low quality stuff, people won't buy your stuff. How do you roll the die? Maybe you can get away with it long enough to drive your competitors out. Then you're it. And so, with that, Taylor also came up with this. Let's jump right to, we'll come back to the assembly. There we go. This organizational structure. Have you ever seen a graph like this? You probably all have, haven't you? Frederick Taylor came up with this. An organizational structure to give different responsibilities, division of labor, to management of a company to become more efficient. So, for example, board of directors are the large shareholders of a company. Anybody know what a CEO stands for? Yeah, Chief Executive Officer. They also have other ones. This is very generic graph. But he is the man, not necessarily a stockholder, even today more and more they get paid in stock. They might not know anything about the company. Like if it's a railroad, they might know nothing about railroads. But they know how to organize the capital, organize the people. This modern business practice. And you'll notice something else. We have different managers. So the workers become lower and lower, very separate from them. So as more and more business today, virtually all are in this structure. Small business, the idea of you knowing your boss, that don't exist. Let's get back to this. One of the best examples would be, Henry Ford in the Model T. He did not invent the assembly line. He did not invent it, but he would perfect it in many ways. The idea of all the workers sitting on one spot, plotted on one spot, and they move the car to them on a line, on chains and on a conveyor belt. And he just this one thing, attach 2 bolts to the fender over and over again for 12 hours. That's what they do. And cars are still made this way. More and more machines do it, do the work of people, but so eventually, that makes it more efficient, less workers. And standardization. And at first, his other achievement was he paid his workers more. The thought was if I pay them more, they'll buy Fords. But they'll also stay working at Ford, so I don't have to train new ones. The idea was you work here for the rest of your life. I guarantee you better pay, okay, still pretty low, but better pay, and knowing they'll buy one of those Model Ts. By the 1920s, that would be gone, and he would cut the pay for that. Henry Ford was, he's an interesting guy. He loved Hitler, but look at the price of Model Ts. This is economies of scale, the classic example. They're big enough to produce so many cars. The bugs in production go away, the cost drops, and look what happens. Here's what the price dropped. These are $1920. But the price doesn't matter as much as a huge drop in price. And yet they're selling more, and they're making money. Why? Economies of scale means they're more efficient, and they drive their competitors out. By the way, what happened to smaller car companies? They couldn't compete. They could not compete because Henry Ford and then the other car companies would follow, the big enough ones. General Motors were a bunch of little companies. They had to unify to become big enough to match Ford. They became bigger. Small car companies, their costs are too high. If you don't believe me, go in your basement and make a car. It'd be slightly expensive. You won't make it. And so the $10 million one, $295. And what color were Model Ts? Talk about standardization. Yeah. All black. Why? Only have to paint it one color. As Henry Ford would say, you can have any color you want, as long as it's black. Eventually, they start having new colors. And so here's the assembly line, grueling, back-breaking work. So you can see the line right there, the wheels, and they just move it down. And in the assembly line, you get one guy working a little faster, get the line going faster, and that forces everyone else to go faster. More production. So that leads us to, I just put this up here. Look how economies of scale work for steel and iron. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it, in just 15 years? Especially look at the steel. The United States would pass everybody else in the world. One country was catching us, though. A brand new country called Germany. They're going to kind of commit suicide in 2 wars. That's another story down the road. But thus, we're coming to the era of big business. All of this is, why is this doing this? Let me backtrack. That's weird. I didn't want that all to pop up. I must have hit a wrong button. Everybody, just put down, they call it cutthroat business. Where is it? Sorry about this. I blame society. That's weird. Okay, let me act like you don't see this. Okay, so the era of cutthroat competition. Because what's happening is you get more and more businesses in there, and as they're competing and trying to undercut their competitors, the issue is risk. And I can't emphasize that enough. That's the issue with business to this day, risk. Because if you go out of business, you start your own company, you go out of business, you lose everything. And you're accountable for its debts, you're accountable for its liabilities. For that matter, if your company commits a crime, you're accountable for that crime. There is a lot of risk involved, a lot of risk. And everybody is thinking the same thing. I don't want the risk. So what everybody wants to do is cut costs. Cut costs so they can cut price. If you can drop your price, you can undercut your competitors and drive them out of business. In fact, there's a lot of cartoons of John Rockefeller. Here's another one of Standard Oil sucking up competitors. He was infamous for basically the most underhanded methods. That's kind of shocking what he did it in Kansas when they big oil run there about 1910. But here's the problem. It's hard to cut labor costs. Because remember, labor, the cost of labor is not directly affected by profit. What decides wages? No. And boy, will you find that out. And it's kind of shocking and sad. That means you got to find other reasons to work hard. What decides wages? I told you this before. You said? Yeah, exactly. The market. The market decides. Why I'm pointing like that, I don't know. Yeah, the market does. If there's a shortage of workers, wages go up. If there's a lot of unemployed workers, wages will go down. Even for workers who have jobs, it pushes wages down. And so, if you want to cut costs by cutting wages or anything like that that involves workers' lives, your competitors will scoop them up, and you lose workers. So companies can't cut this yet, unless they create something called a monopoly. We're coming to that, but we're not there yet. So efficiency. You become more efficient, you cut costs. The problem is, if you become more efficient, what are your competitors doing? The exact same thing. So here's the biggie, literally biggie. Get big. Economies of scale. Use scale and get big. If you can drive out your competitors or merge with them, swallow them up, you become bigger. Your cost will drop and the bell will ring. Huh? No, it's not my fault. By the way, it's supposed to be in the 50s tomorrow. Heat wave. This is a little wild, isn't it? Because we've had about 3 winters in a row. It was really cold. I know it's supposed to snow like 2 inches on Saturday, but then be back up in the 40s. I don't know if I like this. I don't want to shovel walk, I guess. I like it. Have a good, if you have any questions about the short answer questions, please ask tomorrow. Please look at it tonight. Please have a good time. Please enjoy yourself. Let me just get you. It's about time you got here, Tyler. We're so tired of this.
It's not my fault.
I give and I give. What do I get in return? Nothing. Nothing. What did you find out about your PE class?
You get an amazing student.
Good one.
That's all. They told you to come back after school.